Hello, our dear viewers, and welcome to a new edition of our program Africa Today. In today's edition, we are going to discuss the Israeli authorities who are refusing to allow the entry of the Commissioner General of the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency UNRWA to Gaza, focusing on its essential role as well as Egypt's intensive efforts to achieve an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. To shed more light, we are having the following report.
Minister of Foreign Affairs Sameh Shoukry has blamed Israeli authorities for refusing to allow the entry of Philippe Lazzarini, Commissioner General of the United Nations Palestinian Refugee Agency, the UNRWA, to Gaza's southern city of Rafah on Monday. Lazzarini revealed in a press conference in Cairo with Prime Minister Shoukry that he had planned to visit Rafah but was informed that his entry has been denied. Shoukry described his entry refusal of a high-level United Nations while carrying out his duties as unprecedented. Rafah currently houses nearly 1.5 million Palestinians, more than half of the Gaza population, most of whom were displaced by the war. Last week, Israel approved a ground operation in Rafah, although Egypt and other countries, including Israel's Western allies, have warned against this step and its disastrous humanitarian consequences. Israel has devised a so-called plan to evacuate the Rafah population to what it calls a humanitarian islands in the central of Gaza, a plan that UNRWA described as catastrophic. Lazzarini has accused Israel of waging a concreted campaign to destroy UNRWA, asserting that abolishing the agency will resolve the Palestinian refugee status and their right to return. Major donors, including the United States, Britain, and Germany, halted their funding to the agency in February following Israel's allegations that 12 UNRWA staff were involved in Hamas' 7th October operation against Israel, as Israel failed to provide any evidence for the claims made against UNRWA staff. The European Union, Sweden, Denmark, and Canada have recited their previous decisions and announced plans to resume funding for UNRWA. Lazzarini stated in February that $438 million, more than half of the income projected for 2024, has been frozen. However, the European Union and some countries, including Canada and Australia, announced they will resume UNRWA funding.
And to shed more light on the issue, we are very much delighted to be joined over the phone by Ambassador Medhat Melegy, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Good afternoon to you, Mr. Ambassador.
Good afternoon to you.
Sir, President Sisi stressed on the importance of the international community's action actually in implementing the relevant UN resolutions. Can you elaborate on the President's perspective on the role of the international community in order to try to resolve the regional or global issues?
Well, we have to understand that Egypt, ever since this conflict erupted, and it was willing to help to ease the situation for the Palestinians, and at the same time to pursue our initiative goal, which is to end up with a two-state solution. Actually, a solution that so far we haven't seen from Israel any acceptance to this point. On the contrary, actually, all the official declarations from whether the prime ministers or several the ministers from the extreme wing government of Israel have refuted totally the possibility of having a Palestinian state, whether we are talking about a demilitarized state or a full-fledged nation. And this is quite clear in everything they did. Actually, we've seen recently even the European Union and its big delegation that was in Egypt recently, calling and urging actually Israel not to launch the ground operation in Rafah and to respect the international humanitarian law and the entering of sufficient aid to the Palestinian the population that is in dire state right now and suffering from famine. And unfortunately, all these calls have been turned down by the Israeli government, and all the demands from its closest allies, such as the European Union countries and the United States, have been rejected, and that the operation will continue, as Mr. Netanyahu have expressed it clearly on several occasions, that the military operation in Rafah will continue whether it is with the international community approval or without, which shows to which extent Israel is totally neglecting the several calls that were it. But actually, and most importantly, that it shows that the lack of any means to implement those rules by the international community gives Israel the thoughts that it can continue with its aggression without any kind of punity. And that's what helps it to continue with this aggression as we have seen so far.
Yes. Sir, also Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry described this entry refusal of Philippe Lazzarini, the Commissioner General of the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency UNRWA, while carrying out his duties as unprecedented. How do you see the situation here on the ground with all the efforts exerted in order to enter the humanitarian aid, and yet we are seeing here rigidity from the Israeli side and a humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip?
Well, actually, you can see it on so many levels, actually. First of all, it shows that the international community and the international organizations are incapable to work in the occupied territories without Israel approval. And that here we have Mr. Lazzarini, who is the head of the UNRWA, is not able to enter to see the operations on the ground and the distribution of the humanitarian aid and the other services that they provide. And it's not a secret that Israel has been trying for decades to totally dismantle this organization, and it doesn't want it to work. We've seen the allegation made by Israel that were never proven until today, which and encouraged by several European and American countries who have cut their funding for the organization just based on some allegations, while over 30,000 persons killed did not provoke in those countries anything to take any measures against the government of Israel or against the state of Israel. However, just some accusations for 8 of the over several thousand workers were enough to cut the funding, which shows to which extent the international community or the so-called the allies of Israel are helping it to achieve its goal, although that what we hear from them about their readiness to accept the Palestinian as an independent state and to recognize the state of Palestine and to ask Israel to observe the international law and the international humanitarian law. But these are only calls that are empty and hollow from any execution, simply because when it comes to deeds, the Europeans and the Americans alike are helping Israel with all what it takes, and they are always adopting the narrative of Israel about an issue. So here we have in front of us a case of an accusation to 8 of the workers or 10 of the workers, which represent actually 0.03% of the total number of workers in this prestigious organization. It were enough to cut the funding from dozens of countries in Europe and the United States and Japan, while the rest did not matter. But let me here add one final thing, that for one of the rare moments that I agree with the Israelis about the need to dismantle the UNRWA, because actually this is one of the purposes of Israel when it was created. UNRWA is only dealing with Palestinian issues. So when you want to cut funding, you are only hurting the Palestinians, and that's exactly what Israel wants. But actually, we have all to ask for the dismantle of UNRWA, and the Palestinians should be dealt with the UNHCR, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, just like any other refugee in the world. And in this case, Israel cannot demand the organization, the international organization that serves the whole world, to stop its works, because it cannot do that. But with UNRWA, it only affects the Palestinians, which is exactly aim of the Israeli government that has been for over decades now. And one more thing, that the UNHCR helped the refugees to regain their countries because they have the right of return, something that Israel do not want to grant to the Palestinians. That's why it preferred to deal with them through UNRWA, that it can cut its works without any problem because it only hurt the Palestinians and not the rest of the refugees of the world. So I agree, this organization has to be dismantled, maybe not at this moment, but has to be dismantled, and Palestinians should be dealt with through the UNHCR and not through a specific organization designed to deal with the Palestinians only.
Yes. Sir, can you here elaborate on the measures taken by Egypt and the initiative to achieve a ceasefire, to push for a truce, to exchange the detainees, and to ensure the entry of the urgent humanitarian and relief help to the people suffering in Gaza?
Well, actually, I mean, honestly, I don't want to go through that. We have mentioned the plan several times. It consists on swapping and exchanging prisoners from both sides and securing humanitarian aid to the Palestinians who are starving right now in front of the eyes of the whole international community, and to have a ceasefire that is aiming to end totally the hostilities of the Israeli army. So the plan is there and we've known about it. The only thing that is missing is the political will of Israel or its supporters, such as the United States and the European Union, the NATO country in general, to force Israel to accept the terms or any other terms in order to ease the life of the Palestinians, the civilian Palestinians who are really in danger right now, and already so many of them died out of starvation and lack of medical supplies and so on. So the only thing that is missing in any plan, not just this one, but in any plan for resuming peace is the political will, and this so far we haven't seen from the Israeli partner. On the contrary, actually, what we've been listening to for the last 2 weeks is that the operation in Rafah is going to take place, whether the international community accepts it or not, whether the United States will approve it or not. And actually, the United States have changed its position from the total rejection of the idea of a ground operation in Rafah to asking Israel to observe the humanitarian rules while it is invading Rafah, which shows that the Americans they accepted at the end the principle of Israel, that Israel can continue its operation in order to achieve its goals according to Israel itself, which are the total destruction of Hamas and the liberation by force of the Israeli hostages.
Indeed.
So unfortunately, what we've seen is a lack of willpower and a political desire, serious one, to end the hostilities and to stop Israel. When we will see this pressure, Israel will have to accept. But unfortunately, because the international community is turning a blind eye to Israel and only contenting itself by just urging Israel to observe the international law and the international humanitarian law, this does not deter Israel from continuing its aggression on the Palestinians, and it will unfortunately continue the aggressions until further notice.
Yes. Also, sir, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is returning to the Middle East today for his 6th visit since the start of the Israeli war on Gaza. He is trying to push for a deal to secure a temporary pause in the fighting and the release of hostages. How do you see this visit, again, the 6th visit since the start of the war by Blinken to the region?
Well, it's not a secret that there is a clear divergence of point of view between the American administration and President Biden and the Israeli extreme right-wing government led by Prime Minister Netanyahu. But this did not, until today, reach the moment of forcing Israel to accept the rules of those who are trying to help, such as Egypt and Qatar and even the United States itself.
Yes.
We've seen even the United States resorting to airdrops of humanitarian aid because it couldn't convince Israel to open any crossings to enter the humanitarian aid, which is something very costly. And at the end, we are now observing the possibility of continuing with operations by port, by the port of Gaza. And we hope that this is only for humanitarian purpose, because there have been rumors about the possibility of trying to forcibly displace the Palestinian by sea. And this is one of the reasons why we are building this port, in order to receive the boats that maybe will carry the Palestinians out. We hope that this is just a rumor and there is nothing serious about it and nothing real about it. But we hope also, when it comes to your question, that Mr. Blinken is coming with new proposals and new means of implementing those proposals, and to convince the Israeli government to accept them and to continue with a certain truce or ceasefire and exchanging of prisoners, as mentioned before during the Egyptian Accords or the Paris Accords or the Qatari offers. I mean, we had so many plans, but unfortunately they were always met with an Israeli rejection, and sometimes even by not participating in the negotiations and not sending any delegation to discuss it. So let's hope that Mr. Blinken is coming this time with a better solution and better means to implement it.
Indeed. Ambassador Medhat Melegy, former Assistant Foreign Minister, thank you so much, sir, for your very precious input. Always a pleasure, sir. And according to the United Nations, the number of people affected by violence in South Sudan surged by 35% in the last 3 months of last year. The head of the UN South Sudan mission said that the mission was doing all it can to prevent violence and build peace in the affected areas. He also urged South Sudan's government to intervene to resolve the underlying grievances and build peace. More details.
According to the United Nations, the number of people affected by violence in South Sudan increased by 35% in the last 3 months of 2023. The United Nations mission in South Sudan has documented 233 incidents of violence affecting 862 people. Among them, 406 were killed, 293 were injured, and 100 were kidnapped. This is a 35% increase in casualties compared to the previous quarter. South Sudan is due to hold elections later this year, the first since the 2018 peace deal between President Salva Kiir and his former rival Machar, which ended a 5-year conflict causing hundreds of thousands of deaths. Violence caused by ethnic tensions and disputes over resources, such as land, has increased in various parts of the country in recent months, particularly in the oil-rich Abyei region. UN Miss Head Nicholas Haysoum said the organization is doing everything in its power to prevent violence and bring peace to affected areas. It said it has carried out at least 10,000 peacekeeping patrols by land, air and sea over the past year. South Sudan, one of the world's youngest nations, also suffers from drought and floods, making living conditions difficult for residents. In its latest report on the country, the World Food Programme says that South Sudan remains facing a serious humanitarian crisis due to violence, economic instability, climate change, and the influx of people fleeing the conflict in neighboring Sudan.
Egypt has many great events. Its deep-rooted history is fraught with memorable days of all days and events. The 10th of Ramadan rises out so lofty as Egypt's most unforgettable, most valuable, and indeed most influential. Thus, Egypt will continue to celebrate the anniversary of the 10th of Ramadan, glorious victory through which the 1967 setback was recertified. The honor and the dignity of the nation regained, and the Egyptian armed forces were crowned with the merits that they really deserved. More details about that very important event in the history of Egypt in the following report.
Every year, Egypt celebrates the anniversary of the victory of Ramadan 10th, or the October 1973 victory, commemorating the war in which the Egyptian army defeated the Israeli enemy and regained Sinai after it had been occupied for 6 years. On Ramadan 10th at 2 p.m., the Egyptian army crossed the canal line. Waves of the Egyptian army began to gradually cross in a very elaborate and highly prepared work system. It surprised everyone at the time, as at exactly 2 p.m. in Ramadan 10th, 1973, more than 200 Egyptian warplanes carried out an airstrike on Israeli targets in the eastern bank of the canal. The planes flew at extremely low altitudes to dodge the Israeli radars. The warplanes targeted airports, command centers, radar stations, electronic obstructions, air defense batteries, personnel concentrations, armored vehicles, tanks, artillery, strong points in the Barleaf line, oil refinery, and ammunition stores. 5 minutes after the planes crossed, Egyptian artillery began bombing fortifications and Israeli targets east of the canal, intensively in preparation for the infantry crossing, while the elements of the Engineers Corps and Thunderbolt infiltrated the eastern shore of the canal to close the tubes that transport the burning liquid to the surface of the channel. At approximately 2:20 p.m., the artillery with the high traffic line stopped shelling the front line of the Barleaf Wall and moved its fire to the depth where the second line positions. The artillery with a flat line of passage directly hit the positions of the Barleaf line to secure the passage of the infantry from its fire. Then 2,000 officers and 30,000 soldiers from 5 infantry divisions crossed the canal. They kept 5 bridgeheads, and the Engineers Corps continued to open holes in the burn to complete the passage of tanks and ground vehicles. The October War, the 10th of Ramadan victory, was a turning point in the course of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Among the most prominent features of the October War is the emergence of the competent Arab fighter who is able to make modern and sophisticated weapons work in his favor.
Well, with that, our dear viewers, we come to the end of this edition of our program Africa Today. Many thanks for watching.